I didn't want someone from the deaf community to ever watch the film and go like, what the hell are these people doing?
Right.
Um, so for me, and I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I, they were involved from the beginning, and they were on set with me every day, and I wouldn't move on from a take unless.
This is the Cinematography for Actors podcast.
More than a podcast, Cinematography for Actors is a vibrant community devoted to bridging the gap between talent and crew. Each week, our show offers transparent, insightful conversations with industry leaders. We unveil the magic behind the scenes, from candid discussions about unique filmmaking processes to in-depth technical exploration. Join us in unraveling the intricacies of filmmaking one episode at a time. It's more than just cameras and lenses. We aim to inspire, educate, and empower as we peel back the curtain on the art of effective storytelling. Now on to the episode.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Cinematography for Actors podcast. It is Indiana here and Haley, and we are joined with wonderful director Luis Gerard for The Wake. Welcome, Louise.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Now, I am excited for many reasons for this film. Not only is it Oscar qualifying and it's done its fair share of festival run, but it also was shot in Canada by a Canadian cinematographer. And as a proud Canadian, I love the use of locations that you had and tapping into the heritage of homes themselves and like antiques and what people collect. Now, Louise, for those who haven't seen The Wake yet, can you give us a bit of a log line?
A log line. It's basically, that's a tough one. But in a nutshell, it's the story of two brothers that grow up in a funeral home, and they break into the homes of the deceased during their funeral because they know the houses are going to be empty.
Wonderful. Now, this film you wrote a few years back, and it was a passion project. Can you talk about your decision to finally shoot it, and also what kind of inspired the writing of it?
Well, I wrote it some years before we shot it, probably like 3-4 years before I shot it. So it was like a few scripts that I've written. They were like in a folder in my computer, and I was going to do a feature at the time, and then that feature kind of like fell apart just like a few weeks before prep began. So I happened to be in Canada working, and I told the cinematographer that project had collapsed because he thought I was going into prep right after the thing we were working on, and he was like, oh, and I just told him I just want to do it like a passion project where I don't rely on anyone, that I don't rely on finance falling apart or like. And he just said, well, if you have something that we could shoot here, like send it to me because I would love to do something like that. So that's basically how the film got made, because I sent it to him and Chris Mavely, the cinematographer, and he really fell in love with the project, and he just like basically insisted. He was the one pushing me, let's do it. And he said he would help, obviously, with contacts he had in Canada. So that was the way. That's basically how the film got made, or really what triggered the film getting made. What triggered the idea. Someone asked me this question recently, and I had kind of like forgotten about it. But I just had this idea for a feature film, not for a short. And it was meant to be like, yeah, this brother is growing up in a small town somewhere like in America. And, every time someone passed away, they would, because they knew growing up in a funeral home, they knew, and that's where the funerals would take place. They had the advantage of knowing that the place would be empty. So they would go and break into the house, more like an adventure, because they're like not like savvy criminals or anything like that. They're just bored, and for them, it's more of an adventure than anything else. So I had the idea for a while in my head, but then I just started writing it, and I just kind of like wrote it in one day. Basically, I wrote the script in one day. Started writing something, and then it turned into something else, and then it just sat in my computer for a few years.
Yeah, in that folder of just like dreams of how are we going to shoot this, when is it going to happen, and things like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I read it that it was a proof of concept, and so I was interested. I mean, without giving it away, what are the biggest changes that you had to make as a director for putting it into a contained 20-minute project?
Well, it became a proof of concept. It's funny because it worked the other way around. When I first wrote it, again, it was an idea for a feature, but then because it sat on my computer for so long, I just never really wrote the long feature version of the short. And then so it was shot as a short, but then because it was such a let's say an ambitious short, then I started thinking, well, maybe I should actually write the feature and
right.
make it. But this was while I was prepping the short. So then I started working on the outline of what the feature would be. But as a short, it was never condensed. Like I basically shot the script. Ironically, like I never rewrote the script. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I shot the script that I wrote like years before.
That's cool. That's like a really cool, I mean, it's interesting because I imagine, filmmaking is such a personal art form. And so how you wrote this a few years ago, how many years ago was it? Do you know?
I think I wrote it, the script I think I wrote it 2016.
Got it. And so that's, we're talking 9 years later, right? Yeah.
Like
almost
7 years.
8 years.
7 years.
This is my math, I'm just terrible at math, but it's fine.
A long time later.
A long time ago. Yeah. So not quite 9, guys. I'm wrong. But 7 to 8. So from what you wrote 7 to 8 years ago, and then taking that and like just shooting that script out, what changed for you in the way that you would have maybe directed it or produced it, 7, 8 years ago versus the decisions you made now?
That's an interesting question. An interesting question. I hadn't thought about that. I probably if I would have shot it back then, probably it would have been, I don't know, maybe I would have been less ambitious about it. I think when the short, you've seen it, there were like a lot of different themes, and there were a lot of things that I was trying to touch or talk about without really being too literal about it. So there's like a lot there. Even maybe, I mean, if I were to do it again, the question would be easier to answer if I were to do it again. Maybe I would simplify some things, but it's funny because when you're like working as a writer, as a director, as a producer, and honestly financier too.
Yeah.
You're wearing so many hats that in some ways, I was so literally wearing all of those hats. Sometimes it's hard to separate things. So one thing I can tell you for sure, I would probably not wear that many hats if I were to do it again.
Right.
I would try to wear a few less hats, especially for an ambitious film.
From a logistics standpoint, we're talking about how ambitious it was, and how your DP was really pushing you to like, let's make this film, like let's do it. And while we're here, what are the logistics around how much prep did you actually have? Like, what was your actual number of shooting days? Did you edit in Canada? Did you take it back with you? Like what was kind of the logistics around it?
Well, the prep was, I basically moved to Canada. So
Got it.
I moved, I think I spent about 7 months prepping the film in Canada. So I
Oh my
basically
goodness.
rented an apartment in Canada and moved there. Um, and it was, you know, there were two, because I wrote the script and I had a very, in some ways, I say it's very architectural, the script, how you move from A to B to C. It's not like docu style where the camera is like
Yeah.
capturing things. It's not that loose. It's all like very like
Yeah.
planned. And because I wrote it, I had a very clear idea of how they moved around the houses and how they needed to go from point A to point B
Right.
to point
Yes.
C.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time scouting. So literally, I spent months scouting. I had someone that basically would go with me, and we would drive, and we would like venture to like Milton and other towns in that area, and because those are places where people don't shoot a lot. It's not like Vancouver or Toronto.
Yeah.
They're not like used to production. So it was really interesting because they didn't have like the location departments there, didn't have a bank on locations. So it
Totally.
was literally, we were driving around like farmland, and I would like, we would go and say, what about that house? And then we would just like stop and knock on the door and say, hey, we're looking for a house, or we want to
Totally.
shoot this short film. And some people would say, get the hell out. But ironically, most people actually were very friendly, and they would let us into their homes. And sometimes,
Wow.
because we would be hours like driving, and we did this for so long, sometimes we would be like at 8 o'clock at night, like, and it was winter, and they would just let us into their homes, and they would let us take photos of their house, which is insane when I think about it.
Yeah.
So we met a lot of really nice people that, even though we did not shoot in their homes, they would just let us into their homes and let us look at their like rooms, bedrooms. Some were clean, some were a mess. You know, it didn't matter to them. They would just let us in and take photos, and we just spent a long time doing that. And I was like, I was like, listen, I'm not gonna, because I was also putting part of my money into the film. So I'm like, I'm not gonna do this if I don't feel like I have the right locations or the cast.
Yeah.
So the other thing that was happening was the casting. We were doing like casting and trying to find a boy that was deaf, and also an older brother that was a good actor. You know, at that age, you don't have like a lot of names with careers. So it was basically discovering an actor that could do like a very physical role, but at the same time, and also of course be a good actor, and give me the confidence that he would take the role seriously and learn sign language. So for me, it was very complicated. At least in my head, I was like, oh, this is gonna be so hard. So I
But
just,
that
yeah,
worked
spent
out.
a
You
lot of
ended
time.
up finding an Emmy winner to do that role, correct?
Yeah, he was amazing. That was probably like the one, I always say he's like one of the best decisions I made.
Oh.
Casting him.
I would love to know, speaking of ambitious projects and logistics, so this film stars a young deaf actor, Xander Koldek-Bola, and he's magnificent and knew sign language before he started, but then you had the entire cast learn sign language alongside.
Yes.
What were the logistics? What was the process of getting everyone in the cast to be able to sign well enough to perform their roles?
Yeah, it's a good question. We first of all, we did a lot of rehearsals. There was a few things. First, I had to find someone who spoke sign language, ASL. That was the first thing we did. And she had some experience in production, but she basically she was always present on every cast session, every casting. She was there because she was the person that enabled me to communicate with whoever was coming to cast. So she was part of the project from the very beginning. Eventually, when everyone was like casted, she was at every rehearsal. And then she brought in two other ladies who were, because they had to rotate. So that was one thing. So that was probably like stage part one. There was also another person that she brought along. It was a young actor who's also deaf. He recorded every line that was in the script in sign language in ASL, and he for every cast member, and he sent a video so everyone would practice on their downtime, and then we would meet in rehearsals. They were all present, so at least this lady who I want to say her name is Catherine, and this boy was present during rehearsals, so they were always monitoring. For me, like I wanted the signing to be perfect, because I didn't want someone from the deaf community to ever watch the film and go like, what the hell are these people doing?
Right.
So for me, and I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so they were involved from the beginning, and they were on set with me every day, and I wouldn't move on from a take unless they said it was perfect. Because one thing I discovered about sign language, that like a little thing, maybe this instead of this, can mean something entirely different. So sometimes what looked to me like a great take, he would come and say, no, he needs to fix this thing. And so it was like quite an undertaking. Obviously, they were on set every day on rehearsals. So they were this team. They were about four. They were a part of a process from the very beginning, and they were also checking how the cast was improving as we kept doing rehearsals and eventually table reads. So yeah, I could not have done it without them. That's for sure.
Wow.
Was there ever any kind of discussion that you had to have with your DP, your operators, your actors, to make sure that their sign was seen in the frame, or was that intuitive?
No, it was intuitive. Obviously, because the story revolves around the brothers, and most of the signing it's between them. We always frame things in a way that we could see that, because obviously it's a pretty silent film without, like, there are very few like spoken lines in the movie. So it's probably like 80% a silent movie.
And
except that dinner scene.
Yeah. Now with the within the film, I think maybe starting in the dinner scene, the narrative, like, perspective switches a little, where you're suddenly from the perspective of Xander, not hearing what he's hearing. What was your decision to have two different protagonists in the film?
You mean different protagonists being the two brothers? The
brothers, yeah, because the majority of it's from like the older brother's perspective, but then you have moments where you swap into kind of Xander's character. And so what was it always the decision to kind of go between the two of them, to kind of swap as we're getting kind of closer to the end? Or was this something that you're like, I just kind of want, I think we need that, and added it in?
It's a good question. The script was wrote in that manner. I wrote it that way. So like, if you read the script and you watch the movie, like, I would say 80% is pretty loyal, except to like a couple of things, or faithful, sorry, to the original screenplay. Like, for example, when you change perspectives in the last house, when you go from one to the other, that's the way it's written. And there's that moment in the dinner scene where you also change perspectives and see things from the boy's point of view. In hindsight, maybe that's something I would change if I did it again. Just because it's not something that I'm very like critical with myself. So
I get it.
So that maybe that's something I would do different, just because it's not something I did again in the film. But that's
okay. Yeah. Now, with the architecture, you talked about the architecture of your script and very much understanding like the A to B to C. I noticed that a lot of your scenes, and you spoke about this briefly, was the transitions between scenes are very clear cut. Like at one point, you know, they're playing with the gun and then it goes to the fridge. I think that's right after. But those transitions, are those written into the script as well? And did you shoot them out exactly as like we knew we were going to be in the fridge, or did you know we just need a transition that isn't like an establishing to then a close? It's more just what was kind of your
Interesting. So some of them are written in the scripts, some of them are not. Some of them I basically with the editor like created them, because there are like sound transitions, like for example, like when they throw something in the water and you hear a gunshot and then you're like in the woods. So you have like little moments like that, or like there's a moment, there's the transition, which is, it's like a subtle transition, but with the father in a prep room looking down, and then it cuts to a paper, the kid, and that's how it transitions. So you think like that's what the dad is looking at, and then you reveal that you're somewhere else. It's the older brother going through things in his father's office. So there are transitions like that were like in the edit, and then a lot of other transitions. Like for example, to give you one, the one when the kids and their mom, and she's fixing a picture, and then we transition to the house, or the first house they're going into. So those were like written in the script that way. So it's the mix.
Okay, we are stoked to shout out our audio sponsor, Deity Microphones. Their S-Mic 2 Pro shotgun mics have impeccable sound clarity, directionality, headphone monitoring, and a user-friendly design. And we're proud to launch our studio with them. Our goal is to bring you educational gems every episode, and with these mics, you can listen to the best quality audio possible wherever you are. To learn more about using Deity mics for your own podcasting, voiceover, or filming needs, go to deitymic.com.
I don't think Haley and I have ever actually talked about this with a guest before. How do you weigh audio versus visual transitions? So using an audio cue versus like a visual cue. Like, what is your mentality around like how to decide in an edit what to use or when to place it?
I'm more of a visual person. So, and I tend to like love, I look, obviously film is a visual medium. So like being able to tell a story without words, I think it's something that I've always been passionate about. And I think it's a great way to like, to tell a story. Obviously that's not for every story. So, but that's something that's like already like embedded in me. So I do think that way. So for me, it's always, I tend to think visual first, but in a movie like this where sound is also so important, because it's in a way part of the story, some of the sound design and the sound transitions, like for example, there's a lot of, the script is very descriptive. So there are like what happens with the sound, like for example, when we cut between the brothers in the last house where there's no sound, and that's all written like that. And specifically, like it was not something that we came up during post.
Cool.
And even the music and the way the music plays in that sequence, it's also, it had to be scored in a way that it did not interfere with those, like with that contrast and sound design.
Wow.
Hopefully that worked.
Yeah,
it
definitely.
Is. So I love when you bring things up like this, Indy, and I love this podcast so much because I'm always learning so much stuff. I have never even considered that an audio cue could be the thing moving the edit or any, for me, I've always thought, well, you shoot the thing, it's visual, and then like sound comes in and they design around you. But like that, the idea that you could be like, no, this one is going to be a cue that they hear and then we're cutting to something else, blows my mind.
I love
I
it.
feel like it's, you say that and I'm like, you said it and I'm like, it's something I should actually know, but nope, I didn't.
Why we're here. We're learning, everyone. We're educating and
Absolutely.
inspiring.
Learn with me.
Yeah. So speaking of movement, I mean, we talked about, your love of the visual, and so there's a lot of weight there. It felt like there was two references that really came up for me while watching it. It felt a lot like the Spielberg, like with the bike riding and the movement and like the going from wides and going around the town and making it feel local and like a community. It felt very like Spielberg-esque in that sense. And then it also, the relationship with the brothers remind me of like Malik's like Tree of Life, with the exploration of objects when they enter houses, that scene of entering houses and stuff like that. What were your big references for the film?
To be honest, there were no references. I didn't
Cool.
really use her reference.
What?
I didn't really. I did not use her reference. But here's the thing. Because I don't want that to sound pretentious.
No.
But I want to say that in the back of my mind, Stand By Me was like present, but I'd be lying if I told you that I even rewatched it while I was like doing this film. But I do have a thing with references. Like sometimes I just don't like using them because I feel like it's a way of copying. And the reality is that I'm always watching things, whether it's movies or whether it's going to a museum or a gallery. I'm always absorbing things. So there's something that I love about just coming up with something and not necessarily knowing where it came from. But of course, I don't want to say I'll never use or I've never used references before, but it just depends. It depends if I really need it because I'm having trouble visualizing something, or I'm trying to recreate a particular period, or like or a topic that I'm not familiar with. There are many reasons for using references, but this was not one of those for me. But I can't deny that, and I remember thinking about Stand By Me when Isaac, the leading character, he had much longer hair, and I asked him to cut it, and I wanted him to cut it really short. And I remember thinking about one of the characters in that movie, Stand By Me, that had like the short hair, and so it. But again, I did not rewatch the movie, but that was a point where I thought, am I playing homage to Stand By Me in this movie?
Yeah.
So then if you're not using references, what is your process of communicating to your visual team, your DP, your set designers? How are you telling them how you want things to look?
Good point. So I mean, when I spoke to Chris, and again, I'm a very visual person. I also love photography. I'm also a photographer, so I tend to think very visual or visually. But when we did sit down while we were prepping, and I remember we were going page by page, and I was telling him how I saw every scene and how we could shoot it, and we were basically like just discussing like the approach. Like for example, we talked about is this like a movie that we want to tell like handheld or more observational, or is it a movie that's like a little more stylized and it's more like dollies and like more like cleaner, like subtle camera moves. So because of the tension, I was kind of torn about, because there was a part of me that wanted to go handheld to like make it feel more grounded, but at the same time, I also knew that I was making something that was more stylized and had all this tension from the very beginning. So we agreed on going with like the decision of making it more like dollies and anamorphic lenses and blah 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 blah. But we kind of like broke it down, the script page by page, and talked about how to shoot it. But I tend to approach things from a conceptual standpoint, and say, okay, this is how I have, this is what I have in mind, this is how I think it should look. And then what I think is nice about that is that then it's the DP's interpretation of what I'm thinking and what he brings to the table, and it's something that's a little bit more organic, rather than, okay, let's make it look like this. I do remember showing him a photograph that I found. It was a picture of, and I can't even remember where I found it. It was a photograph of a boy or a man sitting on a bed. He was silhouetted and against like a chair or a window. And I told him, I like this kind of like, and he really liked it. And we had that was the one photo that we used. But we didn't sit down and watch movies or talk about like, okay, let's shoot this scene like this and that. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with
everyone has a different process. This is the beauty of hiring people and working with people you trust and whose, visual or creative work you appreciate, because there is beauty in just being able to show somebody one photograph and say, this is how I want it to feel, and they run, and then you can be happy with it at the end.
Absolutely. And that was more of a reference for lighting, obviously, because it was just like a photo. But again, from a photographic standpoint and how the story progressed, like I was telling you earlier, I had like, and maybe this is what happens when you write a script, because then you're already like, in some ways when you're writing, you're visualizing the scenes and how you want to shoot them, which can be a good thing, sometimes can be a bad thing, because now you're like attached to like an idea. But like, for example, just to give you a very concrete example, I was telling you that I was looking for houses that had like the window to the basement here, so that the staircase could be like, and I had this house in my head that I never found. So like the last house where the kids break into, that's 3 houses.
Oh, wow.
The exterior is one house, the basement is one house, and everything else, the bedroom and the living room area is one house. Obviously, you watch the film, you can't ever tell.
Of course,
that it's 3 houses. But
that is the magic.
That is the magic. That is the magic. I love it. The art of make believe.
Yes, always and forever. Now, The Wake is Oscar qualifying. Congratulations, that's wonderful. How do you approach this? Is for kind of any directors, producers listening, who are about to submit to festivals or deal with Film Freeway. What is your advice on festival distribution, applying to certain festivals? What festivals? How do they, how are you selecting where it's going? Because it's played at, a dozen or so festivals, maybe more at this point. But
it's more like 30 festivals. It's played at now. I hadn't done or dealt with shorts in a while. I did 2 shorts when I was in college. And then I wasn't aware how much it had changed. And Film Freeway, like I can tell you that there are fake festivals on Film Freeway. So that's one thing I can tell you for sure. Like, do your research, because there's like fake stuff there. And obviously there are the festivals that everyone would love to be at, like the Sundance and the Berlins and Cannes, Venice, which have a lot of prestige. But at the same time, it depends on the movie you're making and what fits those festivals, because a lot of things festivals have their own agendas, and there are years, like for example, I was told like, hey, don't submit to Tribeca because they told me this year Tribeca is looking for, because it was after the pandemic, and they're looking for things that are lighthearted. There was someone that worked at Tribeca who told me this. Just to give you an example, there are festivals, and obviously my short in particular, because it's a little long. Actually, the film is 30 minutes. The version you saw is a condensed version, because this same person who's like a festival advisor and she works for Tribeca, she told me you should cut it down to 22 minutes with credits if you want if you want the film to go to festivals, because at 30 minutes, it's going to be only a handful of festivals that will take it, also because it's a darker film and blah, blah, blah. So obviously, she was like, the sweet spot for shorts is between 12 minutes and 15 minutes. And I knew that. I can't say I didn't know that before embarking on this film, because I had done 2 shorts in college, and actually one was 12 minutes and the other was 15. And they went to good festivals. But for me, I wanted to do something more ambitious, something that told a larger story, because I've done the shorter ones, even in commercials. So I knew I was taking a risk by doing something longer. The script was 20 pages long. I thought, oh, okay, it's going to be probably with 20 pages, it's probably going to be like a 24-minute short film. And then, when I started cutting, it was 30 minutes. It was like, I think the first cut was 32 minutes.
Wow.
And when we started like trimming, it was like 30. We couldn't like get it down, and we could get it down. And we decided, okay, we eventually like finished it and did the grade and did the mix, did everything. And then before I started submitting, a friend recommended this lady, and she watched it, and she said, I really like it, but at 30 minutes. And then
Totally. Yeah.
she was like, you should get another. She was very honest. She was like, if I were you, I would go to another editor, because it will be very hard for you and your editor to like distance yourself from, and try to cut it. She said, I know this is impossible to get it down to 15, but my advice is 22 without credits. And it was 23 and a half. What we could do, I couldn't get it down to 22, and that's the version you saw.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's hard with festivals. There's so many out there, and I think there are some really like the ones that have the most prestige and that everyone would like to go. But at the same time, someone told me something, gave me good advice. He was like, hey, I think the most important thing is doing a good film and trying to get it out there. There are people who win at Sundance and who win at Cannes that you never hear of again. So like getting your film to those festivals doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's great, but I think it's trying to do what's right for your film, and then finding the right festival for it, because it can be there are festivals like Sitges or the one in Brussels that are great for genre. There's shorts in that's now in Tokyo. That is a very prestigious festival. So there's a lot of different festivals that can get the film noticed, and I think the most important thing is having a short that can help you get your next project done, and that's probably like through a producer. Again, I mean, there are great festivals out there, but not every film it's suiting for those festivals. So, but I think it's because there are so many festivals. I think it's good to know, like, get someone involved if you're not that familiar with, like I was, with the festivals out there. Like, trying to get someone that can help you find what's right for your film. Does that make sense?
I think that this is really great information for new filmmakers who may be listening to listen to and think on. I know a number of filmmakers who kind of let their rejection from festivals stop them, like end their career basically. You know, they give up because they didn't get into Sundance or something like that, because they thought they had a really good film. And what I'm hearing from you is, just because you're not getting into a festival that year with that project does not mean that you didn't make the good film. It means that festivals are looking for something specific from year to year. And if you don't have someone on the inside who can tell you what they're looking for, you're going in blind. Also, there are guidelines, spoken or unspoken, that make programmers more likely to choose something. And you can still have a very good project, and you can still create a life for that project. And it doesn't necessarily have to be at a festival. And not getting into a festival doesn't mean you've done a bad job and that you're not cut out for this.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there are shorts that I'm sure you've all seen that have been to like Class A film festivals that you go like, really, like,
Totally.
I mean, so you know, it's very subjective, but it's very political.
Yes.
When it comes to film festivals. So and sometimes it's that even they this is the kind of work that they want to focus on this year. And sometimes there are, I've also heard that like I can tell you out of experience that my short, because I control the link, so I can see who watches and how long they watch it, and I could tell that sometimes they would watch the first 2 minutes of the short and that would be it, and they wouldn't watch anymore. So it's complicated. And I remember, like, as I tried to understand what was going on, some people said, well, a lot of festivals have like people that they're volunteers, that they're like the first gap, that they're just watching the films, and they give it if they give it a certain score, then the next tier of like people that are now involved in the festival, they will watch it. I understand. I mean, if you're like festival like Sundance probably gets like 15,000 shorts submitted a year, who's going to watch that? You know, it's and I'm guessing the same goes for festivals like Cannes. But I don't think people should get discouraged by that. Like my first short went to Venice, and I was like 19 years old, and that didn't mean I did another short, or someone called me to do like a movie or anything like that. So I think you have to take those things with stride. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Now, you know, we talked about this being a proof of concept. Is there a feature of The Wake in the works now, or what's the next thing? What's up?
So yeah, there is a screenplay already written. It's like a feature version of The Wake. However, I also wrote 2 scripts during the pandemic, and those are the ones that have been moving a little bit faster. Like different producers have liked those, and they're moving those. So those are the ones that are like on the horizon. But you never know with these things. But the features version of The Wake is actually quite different from the short. It's probably like the first act is the short, and then it's a different movie. So, and I'm still like working on it. It's not, I wouldn't say it's finished. There's a draft, but I wouldn't call it a finished draft.
Cool. That's awesome. Well, it's really exciting.
Hopefully in the future, we'll see.
Absolutely. Yeah, the feature version. Well, I'm so excited. Unfortunately, we have to wrap things up, but I'm stoked that we were able to talk with you, Louise. And The Wake was a wonderful short film, and I'm so excited that it's Oscar qualifying and has been at over 30 festivals. We get to see a lot of shorts, and I think probably I can speak for Haley as well, that not only was it beautifully shot, but it has a wonderful story within it. And I think the relationships between characters are really interesting. So thank you so much for joining us on the CFA podcast, and best of luck with the rest of the festival run, as well as your first feature.
Join us in bridging the gap between talent and crew. Start by subscribing on your preferred podcast platform, sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date on vendor discounts, community events, and new podcast releases, and educate yourself through our free course releases on YouTube. It all starts at cinematographyforactors.com. And if you like this episode, consider leaving a review to make it easier for other listeners to find us.